All right. Hi, everybody. I am Dr. Amy Nelson, and we were having trouble with our Facebook Live today. So, this is just a recorded video of the topic that we were going to discuss. So, sorry it's not live. I really like saying hi to everybody who hops on. It's fun, but we're just going to have to do it this way today and roll with it. We're just going to have to roll with it. So, today I wanted to talk about the brain and phosphatidylserine. And phosphatidylserine and I have had a checkered past. This is actually it's a supplement. You'll see it. It's actually a phospholipid, and we'll talk about what that means. And it helps with brain function, cognition. It has been known to moderate the adrenaline pathway, and including cortisol and then actually norepinephrine. So it's kind of used as with the idea of calming an anxious mind, an anxious nervous system, adapting the adrenal axis, helping with cognition and memory and all this kind of stuff. Now, have I gotten it to work? Hmm. My personal history with it is I've given it to people and had mixed reviews on it, honestly. One lady took high doses of phosphatidylserine and it did help her restless legs, but the next 40 people with restless legs, it didn't, so it's one of those things where there's probably more to the riddle than understanding, just take this for this kind of thing, right? So I took it on myself to do kind of like a deeper dive into phosphatidylserine so I could understand what it's about. Why is it working sometimes and not others? What are the nuances with it? And that's going to bring us to our topic about our brains, right? And this is something that we should all pay attention to because we want to understand our brain as an organ. And our brain as an organ, of course, we have memories, we have learning capability, our ability to focus. I mean, our nervous system, of course, is connected to our brain, and it's not like, our brain doesn't really get feedback from the rest of our body to regulate emotions and energy levels and focus and all that too. We want you to kind of feel like we know that the body and the brain work together, right? But we are kind of understanding our brains from the health and well-being aspect. As an organ, if we have cognition issues, memory issues, focus issues, and then of course mood regulation issues, which usually stems into our nervous system regulation, our stress and calmness, our ability to kind of adapt in that way. We are going to start understanding if something's off in any of those departments, we're going to ask, okay, what is the tissue like in our brain? What is the healing capacity of our brain? Do we have a lot of oxidative stress in the brain? And how are we being regulated? I think those are all very valid questions. And do remember this. Anxiety and inflammation create oxidative stress for our sweet little brains, right? And I think about anxiety in a way that I think about it as an oxidative stressor for our bodies. And think of it this way, like when we're really up in our brains and we're very like ruminating, worrying, overthinking, we're very stimulated in fight or flight. Our brain is going to this pattern of like, I have to think, I have to rethink, I have to ruminate, where's the threat? Or if I'm in a terrible situation, where did my brain wants to know how I got there, right? So I'm overthinking, overanalyzing, all that kind of stuff. You can see how that style of thinking comes from our little fight or flight response, right? And our little neurons are like this. So when we are in fight or flight, we do have an excitatory reaction on the neurons, right? And so we are kind of stimulated. Think about all the energy it takes to do this. Worry, 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 overthink. You know what I mean? Think about the what adrenaline feels like. Think about what your body feels like in those states of stress. And we talked about this a couple weeks ago, that anxiety itself is very adrenal fatiguing, right? The adrenal glands are the little stress are the little glands on top of our kidneys that do respond to stress with us, right? They are going to dump neurotransmitters like epinephrine and norepinephrine and a stress hormone called cortisol. Cortisol also adapts our diurnal rhythm. It helps us be a daytime animal, right? So, when we have chronic stress, we're going to adapt our sleep wake cycle a little bit. Think about how deer sleep. We talk about this a lot. Like the deer sleep like 4 hours a night and they get 30 minutes of REM sleep. Why? Because they're gonna, come out of sleep and run from the predator that's trying to eat them, right? Same, I have horses. I love horses. Same thing. Horses will sleep standing up. Why? because because mountain lions are real, and so they will come and get them, and so us as flight animals kind of have that memory of having to sleep in a way that we can come out of it quickly. So when we've got cortisol involved, if we have a cortisol melatonin cycle that's off, melatonin and cortisol are opposites, they flip flop. Melatonin secretion, we know it because some of you take melatonin to go to sleep, right? So we're going to have melatonin secretion starting when the sun goes down. The pineal goes, oh, time to secrete some melatonin. She's going to get real sleepy here. And then we fall asleep, and then melatonin's maximal secretion is between 2 and 4 in the middle of the night or early morning, right? So then we are sleep. And then it's going to start coming down. And then what's cortisol going to start do? It's going to start rising at that time. And then when sun comes up, we should have cortisol, hello, wake us up. And then cortisol's technical maximal secretion is actually 45 minutes after our waking, so then we've got cortisol is going to be the highest it's going to be all day, even without coffee, right? And then cortisol gradually comes down, and then they do a swap again, right? And that's how we know we are daytime animals, because our pineal glands are adapted this way. And so when we are too stressed out, we start to adapt that sleep-wake cycle, right? So how does that affect our sweet little brains, right? Well, of course, if you don't sleep, and you have to sleep a good 8 hours, and actually in research, I think in my reading, I've seen 7.5 hours, I think is the bare minimum a human being's brain needs for sleep. Like, you'll talk to a lot of people who, oh, I only need 6 hours. That's under the category of lies I tell myself or lies I try to get myself to believe. You need more than that. You need more than 7 hours. You need probably 8, 9 hours of sleep, and continual sleep. If it's broken, then we've got problems, because the brain needs time to remember things, to emotionally regulate, to learn, so all of that is super important for our brain. So when somebody does come in with, saying, hey, my mind isn't where it has been, it's I've got brain fog, or I've got some memory issues starting, or I'm really wanting to prevent my future dementia that runs in my family, all these kind of things, you're going to talk about brain health and the health of sleep. So that's an important thing. Second is oxidative stress, like we touched on a second ago. Remember that anxiety system that does create an oxidative stress on the actual like neurons in your body, right? So think of it this way. If we have oxidative stress happening, our cell membranes aren't as healthy as they should be. And for us as animals, we've got a cell membrane, and it's called a phospholipid bilayer. So hello, back to biology. So biology 101, even in junior high, you're gonna learn about the the phospholipid bilayer, right? And we're not plants, right? Plants have a cell wall, we do not. So now way back a million years ago when I was learning cell biology, we had I remember learning the nucleus was the brain of the cell, right? So you have these structures in the cell. You've got the cell membrane, you've got all these structures, and then you've got the cell nucleus, because it houses the DNA. And it was thought that there was probably constant communication with this, and that's what was organizing the cell and creating cell-to-cell interaction. we know now that the nucleus is more like the brain's, or it's not the brain of the cell, it's more like the filing cabinet. It's really going to kind of, when the cell goes through replication, then yes, we're going to have some activity in the nucleus, but the real workings of the cell have more to do with the cell membrane than they do the inner workings inside the cell, right? So the membrane, that phospholipid bilayer, has to be very healthy. And what do you think can really kind of bother that phospholipid bilayer? Well, what we call oxidative stress, right? So the lipid bilayer is going to have a lot of channels and receptors and structure. Cholesterol, remember cholesterol, that's what helps keep integrity to the lipid bilayer. That's one of the roles of cholesterol. So fun fact is cholesterol is not your body's enemy. We act like it is all the time because we've got, high cholesterol, and that's a different story. But really the role of cholesterol is it's like a little scaffolding for the lipid bilayer. So when you've got things like phosphatidylserine, that is going to hook into that phospholipid bilayer. And that's going to tell us it does something. It actually facilitates a reaction in the body. And when we are especially studying low memory or cognition issues or brain fog, when we study these different styles of phospholipids, we're going to see some different effects. You are going to see some ways that it stabilizes that cell membrane. Now let's get back to my debacle. Oh, good. Shouldn't this be amazing? No. So that means I went to the research, right? I went to kind of look at some studies that were done, because my first question is like, what really is the dose? Over the counter, or I mean, in supplement land, you're going to see dosages usually around 100 to 150 milligrams. But there are products that have higher dosages, like at 500 and 1,000 milligrams. Now, this one little study here was kind of interesting. The effects of phosphatidylserine on endocrine response to moderate intensity exercise. This is a really interesting study that I was kind of fascinated with. This one, the researchers set up, for exercise science especially, they set up, I should have remembered what they were doing. So it was basically I think it was sprinting. So you had these kind of high intensity interval type training, and you have a group of people who are, I believe, cycling, intermittent cycling. I'm wrong on that. And they would measure cortisol levels, growth hormone levels, and then what was the other one? There was another, lactate, so lactic acid levels. In addition to testosterone. So they had these parameters: cortisol, testosterone, lactate, and growth hormone. And so they measure it, in an exercise cycle. And then researchers measured it by giving 800 they did the same pattern again. And then the researchers gave 800 milligrams of phosphatidylserine. And the only variable that drastically changed was cortisol. So testosterone, lactic acid, and growth hormone didn't change, but cortisol did. It substantially lowered the cortisol response after that. Now, what is that going to mean? Well, so phosphatidylserine then has a regulatory effect on cortisol especially. Now, would it have been nice if they kind of measured probably norepinephrine or epinephrine? Yeah, that would have been cool. But again, when you read studies, and this is just a caveat, one of your best classes to take to help you learn how to think is medical research, right? Because you actually are given a bunch of research papers, and you're going to pick them apart, and you're going to learn, does the conclusion match what they were measuring? Does their methodology match? You're going to read it with skepticism, and you're going to read it with a fine-tooth comb. And that's where things like your statistics class is really an important class. That's your other second most important class to take to help you be a really good thinker. Because what we don't want you to do is what most people do. And marketing knows this, doesn't it? So studies show, da 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 da. And you read the study and you're like, there's 2 people in this study and one was your mother. You know what I mean? And so it's like, if a study can be really crappy, when you read said study, and you look at it, you're like, this is the world's most horrible study. And you can kind of understand that study show is kind of a marketing word, right? And then you study marketing science and you start understanding that testimonials and studies show la da da are really things that get people to believe what it is you're saying, whether or not it's true or not, right? So I want you to be a good thinker, okay? And I really want you to learn how to read a study. Now, that said, on here, that would have been a nice offering had they run that as well, but maybe in a repeat study. And that's the other thing too, someone else has to repeat your study and kind of corroborate your findings. That also adds validity to your study. Just because you did it once doesn't really mean you're done. You want your people who don't know you to redo your study and then see what they get, and if they get the same idea, then I think we're onto something, right? So here, this is interesting because we're going to see that the conclusion they made was that probably that phosphatidylserine kind of moderates the cell receptors and the ion channels and all this kind of stuff such that we downregulate the response to cortisol. Well, that's kind of interesting in exercise. Maybe that helps you not have adrenal fatigue long term, or maybe that helps you with blood pressure regulation. Maybe that helps you with like how you heal. But let's take that information to a person who has stress and anxiety, right? And if it is really driven by cortisol reactions, and when you run those salivary and urinary cortisol tests, you will see elevated cortisol all day long in certain stages of the adrenal adaptation. So if somebody's under acute stress, for example, yeah, their cortisol will be kind of high, and you'll see that. And so now we're like, well, body's going to get what we call a depressed HPA axis after a while. And that means that cortisol, is going to shut its own production off pretty soon. And that's because your body knows, like, whoa, you've been under lots of stress lately, and I just don't want you to blow up. So what I'm going to do is shut my own production down. That jump usually comes with an energy shift, an immune system shift, and a metabolic shift. So when you're working with people and their energy, you're going to see things going on there. What does that do to the brain? Foggy thinking. What day is it? I just read a paragraph and I retained nothing. What did you tell me? What's the name of that thing? Oh yeah, spoon. Like, those are all examples that I've experienced. And you have too. And it's, the stress aspect on the brain after the acute stress is something we all share. We all have that, right? And we've all kind of experienced that before. So how do we then help the brain in that case? Now, you can imagine if somebody is into dementia, early stage dementia, or advanced dementia, their stress reactions are going to make all that worse, right? So anxiety support is super important for somebody who is struggling in that department already. And there are so many awesome therapists out there that actually specialize in geriatric care. And my favorite is Catherine Nelson. She and I aren't related, but she's a really good therapist, and she specializes in, like geriatric anxiety. So shout out to her. So I believe also when we are caring for our brains and our memories, we have to ask ourselves, how chronically stressed am I? And what are my adaptations into anxiety? Remember, we talk about not pathologizing anxiety, but understanding it is a tool for your body. It is an antenna going off. It is it's an alarm bell going off. When you take a nice big deep breath and you then reset the tone into your parasympathetic, then your body goes, oh, your alarm bells are going off, but I don't think there's a fire. I think you're just cooking bacon, at least in my house anyway. So you might just, there's something there, but we're going to go ahead and put space and time and deep breathing into that so that we can assess that place from our calm brain, right? And gosh, my son and I talked about this yesterday when we're doing math homework, right? We're starting to get worked up about, like, I don't know this. And think about how when we're learning something, we're vulnerable. Like, people really get kind of vulnerable when they're learning something new. You have to take a big, deep breath. and get your brain into the can-do thinking attitude. And then learning becomes easier, right? So a lot of times it's not about fighting over the learning concepts of long division or beginning algebra. It's really about, let's go ahead and just take a big deep breath, calm down, and now let's look at that math problem again. Because now we're in a different frame of mind, right? I learned this from working horses. You know, I grew up in Montana and I learned how to train horses, and you have to, you work your horse in a little round pen, you work them left, you work them right, you do these little dynamics with them, and you watch for your horse to come out of that like fight or flight mindset into what we always call licking and chewing. And so horses will kind of drop their head, they'll take a big deep breath, their jaw and their lips and all of that, their face, everything will just relax a little bit more, and they'll take their little, and sometimes they kind of shake their body out. You're like, oh, good. Now my little colt or my filly she's ready to learn something. She's ready to learn about the saddle and the bridle and the fact I want to ride her. So now she's in her curious brain. We all have that. We're all the same like that. So come out and work some horses with me. I'm going to, side note is I'm going to start doing equine therapy on Fridays. And so that'll be kind of fun. Anyway, the way an animal learns is the way we learn too. We have to be really in our parasympathetic nervous system to learn. So, and why is that? Think about that anxiety, and think about that oxidative stress that's going on, and think about how, it's a useful thing. We're not going to say anxiety is like a terrible thing. Remember, it's your tool, but you need your parasympathetic to be as powerful as your sympathetic nervous system, because then you can truly kind of assess and think and cognate. Your cognition and your creative thinking it comes from your parasympathetic system. Your observation and your like flashcards or your rote memorization or something like that comes from the sympathetic nervous system. Now, observation is super important, so, and I think the sympathetic nervous system does help us with that a wee bit, but you need both, right? You need both. So now, back to phosphatidylserine. So was I underdosing the phosphatidylserine? Yeah, probably, because this study was upwards of 800 milligrams. So other studies that I dug up, here's one for, let's see here. So here was effects of phosphatidylserine on endocrine response. Oh, this is the same study. They were referencing another study that had to do with phosphatidylserine was shown to enhance mood in a cohort of young people during mental stress and improve accuracy. This one's funny. So that was a different one. So that was for young people with mental distress. They were giving phosphatidylserine. The subjects reported that they felt calmer. Cool. What was their dose? 300 milligrams. So that's just a small study. Now here's another exercise science study. So this was phosphatidylserine was given to improve accuracy during tee-off by increasing the golfer's stress resistance. Okay. Okay, so yeah, maybe golfing, so that makes a little bit of sense. So great, I mean, you want to repeat those, right? And you'd want like larger sample sizes and all this kind of stuff, but you have somewhere to go with that. You can try it out and see what you feel and what you think. Are we a little bit more complicated than just, hey, I was stressed out and I took phosphatidylserine and I feel better? We are way more complicated than that, remember. So it is something it's a point to go from, though. You can kind of understand that. And it gave you the milligram dose. So again, 100 milligrams once a day, probably not going to cut it. 150 milligrams once a day, probably still not, so here we're at least at 300 milligrams. Yeah, so here... Yeah, these are other just studies that kind of came out with the effects of phosphatidylserine. This one was really good about talking about moderating the epinephrine and norepinephrine pathways. So, and dopamine pathways. So, phosphatidylserine appeared to be a regulatory intermediate with these neurotransmitters. And this gets into the neurotransmitter science a lot. You talk about your axon, which is your sending cell, and then you've got the neurosynaptic cleft. So think of, like, I always do a puppet show with this for the patients. I'm like, here's your axon from another cell, right? A neuron neuron is further this way. Here's its axon. So here's basically like the sending cell. I'm going to send a signal. Here is my receiving cell. This is the dendrite, right? And so in between these two is the neurosynaptic cleft. So within these structures are going to be packets of neurotransmitters that fuse to the end of this little neuron, right? And then it basically has to jump, and the neurotransmitter actually then gets secreted into that neurosynaptic cleft, and then and has to be received over here. So there's got to be receptors on this dendrite, right? So the type of neurotransmitter tells you what the cell's going to do. Is it excitatory? Is it inhibitory? Excitatory is like nervous system. Inhibitory is like calm, chillax. Now, it's not that complicated, or I mean, it's way more complicated. It's not that simple. So try to know that binary thinking, yes, no, classification, that is easy for the human brain. That's how we learn. But always know, we kind of make a rule to break it, you know. So we're going to say, okay, inhibitory and excitatory. Now, take dopamine, for example. Is it sometimes excitatory? Is it sometimes inhibitory? Well, that's complicated. So we're going to make things simple to understand at first, but don't get too comfortable there. Just know that those are classifications for you to help learn, but there's a deeper picture. There's deeper understanding, and that's okay to build on that, but don't shut your thinking down based upon that, okay? So if you, phosphatidylserine, what is it doing? Well, according to our research, it's going to kind of have a balancing effect on epinephrine, norepinephrine, and dopamine. And that might be why some people notice that they feel calmer. And remember our exercise science. The cortisol levels were improved in the golfers and the cyclists, right? So we saw then recovery out of acute exercise change, you know, so it might have a modulatory effect. Does it probably depend then on the amount of dopamine and epinephrine and norepinephrine? Yeah, probably. So is that why you might not see it work for everybody all the time? Probably, because there's probably some adaptation going on. Of course, we have a lot more complexities to our neurons in an excitatory state, and the nervous system is the one you've been given from birth, and the one you've been conditioned. And even that conditioning is going to start probably in the womb and when you're born, pre-verbal. And even like after that too, every day our nervous system is being conditioned. This is why I like horse training so much, because you have like right now I'm training these Mustangs. It's been really fun. And they are so curious and they are so fun to train, because once they trust you and once the nervous system is really calm and stable, oh my gosh, first off, their bond with you is very cool. They just love you to pieces. And all my horses do. Like even my other two horses that I've trained since they were little, they weren't out in the wild, but they were always curious animals, and they're flight animals inherently. So you build on that softness, that curiosity. And a lot of times you want your horse to be very, you want things as gentle as possible, right? But as firm as necessary. There's a saying in horse training. So when you ride a horse that really, has paid attention to the rider's feel, and the rider, it's like you should ride this horse and they should be like butter. It shouldn't be like driving a tractor, So it's really interesting to see how soft you can get horses. And that's their nervous system, right? Their nervous system is being like conditioned. Now, if I were really jerky, irky, and rode a lot with a lot of spurs and here's my whip all the time, is that horse going to be soft and gentle and easy? Nope. In fact, they're probably going to be hostile. They're probably going to be, I don't know if I would, you probably have some problems with that horse. They probably would like to get away from you. They might really hate the situation, so horse training really speaks to the nervous system quite a bit, and we can learn a lot about our nervous systems by our training, right? So think about that with people too. So somebody who might be grumpier than others, maybe that's all they kind of have been experienced. Maybe that's all they've experienced in their life. So it's okay to show them softness. Be as gentle as necessary, but as firm as needed. Brief, informative, friendly, and firm. That's a really good saying in psychiatry, because if you're trying to set some boundaries, but also you need to be friendly and kind, so the human connections and human interactions are really similar to how we kind of work with horses. So getting back to phosphatidylserine, have I given this to my horses? No, but it's an interesting idea. I always run things past my vet. And so, but I think, I don't ever want to give my horses something to calm down. I just want them to learn to calm down and to trust me. And that right there, like I never give my horses substances to relax and calm down. I'm always, doing that with good training. I think if I couldn't achieve that, I would go find some teachers to help me, learn what I'm doing wrong, So when could you use phosphatidylserine and at what dose? Well, I would start probably at least with 300 milligrams. And I would, if I am struggling with anxiety, first and foremost, I'd go to therapy, right? And learn some talk therapy patterns. I would learn some cognition or cognitive behavior therapy. There's a lot of great therapy out there now that can help with you recognizing your own internal patterns and doing something different, trying something different. So if I still felt like I had foggy thinking and I've been stressed out too long, it would be really nice to probably start with the 300 milligrams, and maybe you try it at nighttime, right? Because maybe if it does happen to make you tired, good, you're going to take it before bed. It might not matter so much. It might be something where you can try taking it throughout the day. Should you take it like 300 or 100 milligrams AM, PM? It might be one of those things that you try for yourself. Like maybe you do 100 milligrams 3 times a day and get that into your system. Loading dosages for things in neurotransmitter land do take a couple of weeks, if not a month. Think about when somebody's first put on medications like Prozac. That takes them at least a month, if not longer, to see results in the body. So we think of it that way, right? So it is probably a longer kind of thing. It's, and don't be surprised if you have to go on up to like 800 milligrams total per day, right? So I hope that helped you. I think that's a good little place to stop. And you can go to my website for more information. Next week, I don't know what we will be doing, but something else that I get obsessed with, I'm sure. So we might talk more about the nervous system. That's a nice thing. I'm also trying to get the class going for perimenopause, menopause. So I'm almost done with that one, and we'll get that posted. So I've got the menopause, or the hormone basics for the menstruating female. That's on my website. So if anybody wants to listen to that, there it is. And then we'll just kind of keep going from there. So yeah, sorry it wasn't live today. I missed y'all, but who knows what's going on with Facebook today. So all right, everybody, bye-bye.